Luke 7 verses 1 to 10 is a story in which the cultural elements of patronage and reciprocity are on full display, and having an understanding of how the system works will make this story come all the more alive as we look at it. So I want to take a few minutes just to walk through that with you, and hopefully we can learn some things together. We're looking down here in this picture of the 4th century synagogue, which still stands in Capernaum. And underneath this synagogue is the foundation of the synagogue that was most likely present during Jesus' day and may well have been built by this centurion who appears in this story in Luke chapter 7. So if you haven't read those verses, feel free to stop this video and get a refresher on the story, and of course we'll look at it together in a minute. So the system that was very common in Jesus' day throughout the Mediterranean world, Greco-Roman as well as even the Jewish culture, would be this idea where you have patrons and clients. The patrons would be the elite members of the society, the wealthy noblemen or merchants, someone with either power, authority, or extreme wealth. So they have money to offer, or protection, legal services, things of that nature. And then you have the clients. This is always an unequal relationship. The client would most likely be someone of a lower status who needs something from the patron. So the patrons would provide things like protection, money, or access to the client, who is obligated to offer something in exchange, but it's not going to be something of the same kind. They're not going to repay money with money per se, or land for land. It's going to be something like loyalty, thanks, allegiance. These patrons may be seeking greater notoriety, greater glory within their community. And so the clients, they can amass an army of clients who become their advocates or loyal subjects of some sort. So round and round that system went. When people needed money in those days, they didn't go to the bank because there was no bank. They may go to their parents, just like people do now, but oftentimes their parents would be in the same situation that they are because they would be in the same class, so they would look to a patron, someone outside the family, but possibly within the community. Another example, here we see the same idea between the patrons and the clients. There is a reciprocal relationship. It's a give and take, but not of like kind. If you have a like kind exchange, that's what would have been referred to as friends. Friends exchange equally in terms of kind. But here we see the patrons, the box on the left, they're seeking those things. So the patrons are seeking status, prestige, honor, influence, control, power, political loyalty. And so their wealth is going to equate to more followers. And so to gain that, they're offering to the clients security, loans, intercession, tenancy, identity, money, employment, access, resources. Now, when this exchange is somewhat equal and deemed fair by both parties, then you have balanced reciprocity when both sides are getting what they want. When the balance tilts towards the patron's favor and you begin to see some exploitation of the clients, then you're going to see an unhealthy relationship. The community is not going to be content with what's happening there. And then on the flip side, when the favor begins to tilt towards the client, then you have the idea of paternalism. In other words, it's almost like a father-child type of relationship where the children seem to get everything they want and offer no gratitude in return. And that's what we have here. So in Jesus' day, grace was not an unfamiliar concept. In fact, grace was the name of the game. The patrons would offer grace or gifts to clients, And so you have the act of giving grace, the grace itself being that gift. And what would be expected in return would be thanksgiving. So gratitude would be the response that was felt obliged by the recipient. So again, as we look at this story, one of the things that Jesus is making very clear in the sermon that he preaches to his disciples that we saw in Luke 6 is that God, number one, is the ultimate patron. There is no greater giver of grace than the Most High God. And Jesus then is God's ultimate agent of grace in the world. He is giving grace freely. And if you want to be a son of the Most High or to be one of God's kind, then you yourself would become a giver of grace. And what would be unique to God's kind of grace that he offers is that God gives grace with no strings attached. So even though we want to give God thanks for the great gifts that he gives us the gifts whether we are responding appropriately or not. So God's gifts are free. He pours out rain on the just and the unjust, as he says. And so we're going to see here in this story how this system is at work, not only with Jesus and in the biblical world, but we're going to see how this Roman centurion, in a sense, understands how the game is played, and he demonstrates amazing faith. And so just looking at the story, reading through it, I'm going to point out several of the key words and ideas that clue us in that patronage and reciprocity are at work here. So it says in Luke 7, verse 1, after he had finished all his sayings in the hearing of the people, speaking of this sermon that Jesus had just delivered, Jesus entered Capernaum. Now a centurion, which is a Roman soldier, he's a ruler of at least 100 infantrymen, as well as some cavalry. So this centurion had a servant who was sick and at the point of death, who was highly valued by him. And when the centurion heard about Jesus, he sent to him elders of the Jews, asking him to come and heal his servant. And when they came to Jesus, they pleaded with him earnestly, saying, "He is worthy to have you do this for him, for he loves our nation, and he is the one who built us our synagogue." And Jesus went with them. So what we notice here, first of all, is that the centurion's servant is highly valued by him. And so the question becomes, well, what is he going to do to offer help or aid to the servant who has brought so much value to him through his service? So in one sense already we can see that there's a sense of obligation that the centurion feels for the servant who's brought great value into his own life, and so we're going to see some sort of a return of favor. And so what he does is he calls the elders of the Jews, and he sends them to Jesus asking him to come and heal his servant. And so we would ask, well, why would the centurion do that? And we don't find out right away until we get to the end of verse 5. And so when they come to Jesus, they're earnestly imploring him to come and heal the servant. They say he's worthy to have you do this for him because he loves our nation and he is the one who built us our synagogue. So the elders of the Jews would be the rulers of the synagogue. In a Jewish community, once you had 10 elders or heads of families within that community, then they would build a synagogue. And of course, that building, which would be not only a religious center, but that would be the community center, that would be a very expensive endeavor. And so the centurion has supplied either the financial means to build this synagogue in Capernaum, or he's provided the manpower. Perhaps he's taken his soldiers and put them to work as a community project. He's done something to provide the means by which this Jewish community now has their synagogue. And so the elders then would feel an obligation to return the favor. The problem is they would not be able to return the favor in kind. In other words, say that synagogue cost $200,000 to build, they're not going to repay the centurion by paying him back $200,000 plus interest. He's going to receive something like loyalty, honor, glory, public praise, some sort of prestige in exchange for this magnificent gift. And so when his servant gets sick, he's giving them an opportunity to return him the favor. And so these elders are more than happy to do it. And the fact that he is a Gentile is irrelevant because they say he loves our nation. So we know from God's promise to Abraham, he's going to bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. This man is a friend of the Jews. And so he's worthy of God's blessing. And so we get this phenomenal appeal to Jesus that he can demonstrate God's love for this man who loves the Jews. So that's telling us something about Jesus, as well as the honor that these elders want to pay, not only to Jesus, but to the centurion. All right, so Jesus agrees. So when Jesus agrees to go with them, we see right away that he is willing to help the elders pay back the centurion for his kind gift. He's willing to agree to the centurion's request. And then, of course, we've got this servant who is near to death. And so Jesus is going to heal him. Now we move into the next paragraph, scene 2 in the story. When Jesus was not far from the house, the centurion sent friends, saying to him, "Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I am not worthy to have you come under my roof. Therefore I did not presume to come to you, but say the word, and let my servant be healed. For I too am a man set under authority, with soldiers under me, and I say to one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my servant, do this, and he does it." When Jesus heard these things, he marveled at him, and turning to the crowd that followed him, said, "I tell you, not even in Israel have I found such faith." So we want to go back into this next section and be asking ourselves, well, what is it that this centurion is doing that causes Jesus to marvel or to be amazed? It's the same word. Because if we're not amazed at what's happening here, then we really don't understand what's going on. So the first group that he sends are the elders, and these elders, we realize by what they say that they owed him a favor. Now the friends would be, friends of the centurion would be people of equal status to the centurion. And so friends share. They can exchange gifts of like kinds. If the centurion invites these people over to his home, they would be considered friends. They could simply return the favor by having the centurion come over to their house for dinner. Friends exchange like kinds of gifts. They have things in common. So one thing we can recognize here, he sends the friends, and these friends now are speaking on his behalf. So they're speaking for the centurion, which is amazing in and of itself. Jesus is going to do this amazing miracle of healing this man for the centurion, who he never actually meets face to face. So the centurion is going to have his request granted, and he's never going to actually meet Jesus, which may be what's having him marvel. All right, so these friends then have the opportunity to intercede or to mediate for their centurion friend. And so again, they may be exchanging a favor, which means at some point, since these friends are interceding for the centurion with someone of higher rank, the centurion sees Jesus as someone of higher status than himself, which is, again, fascinating to think about, the humility of the centurion. So because the centurion is sending friends to intercede on his behalf for someone of higher rank, then that tells me at some point these friends have probably interceded to someone of higher rank who they knew the centurion has at some point in the past interceded to someone of higher rank on behalf of the friends. And so now they're going to return the favor. So it's possible that the centurion has maybe given a request of these friends, say to the governor, or even to, King Herod. All right, so he knows someone of higher rank. He's mediated for these friends in the past, and now he's offering them in exchange to intercede on his behalf. So he's using up all of his capital, in a sense, to get his servant healed. And so he understands the system. He understands that Jesus has the authority to heal this man from a distance. He doesn't need to come under his roof. In fact, he's not going to humiliate Jesus by having him come into his house. Jesus is of so much higher status that to enter into the centurion's home would be to demean himself, to lower himself. And the centurion only wants to honor Jesus. In other words, anything that he does in public before Jesus is going to be as a client. He constantly shows loyalty to Jesus as his patron, that God is going to be pouring out his grace through Jesus. So Jesus recognizes what's going on here. This is the patron-client relationship fully on display. And when Jesus realizes what this centurion is doing, he is amazed. In fact, he says to everyone around him, he says, I tell you, not even in Israel have I found such faith. That word faith in the Greek is pistis. And pistis has a range of meanings. And here we see there's a lot going on. And part of it is certainly confidence. He is confident that Jesus can heal from a distance. He is so confident that Jesus will heal graciously that he is going to act before the deed happens. He's going to honor Jesus for doing what he does before he does it. So he's demonstrating faith prior to the fact. And Jesus finds that very interesting because you have faithful people in Israel. But in one sense, prior to Jesus coming, with the sense of self-righteousness, the idea of say the Pharisees was, we will be good so that God will be good to us. We will keep his law, and because we keep his law, then God will bless us. But what we're seeing with the centurion here is he is acting as if the faith, or that the blessing is a foregone conclusion. And so he is actually showing grace to the elders and showing grace to his friends by allowing them to work on his behalf, because they, in a sense, owe him something. And so he's using up that capital on behalf of his servant. And so Jesus sees this man's faith as a foregone conclusion. It's not an activity to get God to act graciously because of something that he has done. All right, so when those who had been sent returned to the house, they found the servant well. And that closes out the story. Jesus meets the man. All right, so there again we have this synagogue still standing today. And again, this is a 4th century limestone building, but the natural stone foundation, and the Romans, of course, were master builders. So the foundation is still there. They just built a new one on top of it. And so that centurion's legacy still stands today. All right, and just looking quickly at the structure of this story, you have this storyline, and that's the little graph there on the left. You have the climactic moment that happens in the point 3 there, but we see narratively that we had a centurion, had a highly valued but deathly ill servant. And so in 2 parts, we see the centurion sent elders to ask Jesus to come and heal the servant on behalf of the centurion. And then the centurion sent his friends to ask Jesus simply to command that his servant be healed. When Jesus observed the faith of this man, he marveled. And then everyone returns, i.e. the elders and the friends who were sent. And when they got back to the house, they found the servant well. So a nice resolution there to this story. And the center point is what Jesus does in response to the centurion's actions. He marvels. So when we think about, all right, what's the big idea here? Well, if Jesus marveling at this man's faith is the center point or the climax of the story, then through this story we learn something about faith. Now, it may not be everything there is to know or understand about faith, but this story teaches us something about faith. And so just thinking about it in a couple different lights here, we see that faith is the utmost confidence that Jesus possesses ultimate authority over the unseen forces, such as that of illness and disease, regardless of his proximity to the problem. He can just give the command and the disease has to flee. Furthermore, it is a public expression of confidence, loyalty, and honor to Jesus prior to his demonstration of healing power, because he sought Jesus' favor by calling in multiple favors owed to him by others. All right, so through his actions beforehand, he was showing confidence and honoring Jesus as the healer even before he had actually done the healing. So when I think about the big idea from this story that I learned, thinking about it through the lens of patronage and reciprocity, then I see that faith is our public testimony of God's supreme graciousness, even before he helps us, by ourselves being gracious to others seeking our help. In other words, I can show my faith in God by being gracious to others. So my actions demonstrating God's actions show that I truly believe in him. Okay. In other words, if God gives with no strings attached, then I can be giving with no strings attached while I'm waiting for my ultimate salvation. Another way of saying that, faith is treating others now the same way you expect God to treat you in the future. So I can be treating others with loyalty, grace, kindness, generosity, value, showing that I'm confident in God's present and future treatment of me with loyalty, grace, kindness, generosity, and value. I'm going to treat others the way God treats me, even though I've never yet seen him face to face. I'm confident in my future, and so I can practice discipleship of Jesus Christ in the present moment by living and treating others the way Jesus treats me. All right, so in this little episode here, very fascinating episode, but we see almost just like a textbook example of patronage and reciprocity, and how Jesus himself operated in the same system. He didn't discourage it. He just shows how God's grace is even greater than human acts of kindness, because God can give infinitely and with no strings attached. And he empowers us in our own unique ways to do that for others through his own grace and kindness. Hope you enjoyed this, and when you're reading other passages of Scripture, when you see this idea of patronage, reciprocity, friendship, and returning the favor, it'll jump out at you clearly in those passages as well. Thanks for tuning in.